Liber mahas agus fáilteach an the Pauline Garda Commissioner agus a whole lacaha. You're very welcome to this meeting, which is a special session around discussion the last. The principal purpose of today's public meeting is to consider the continuing approach to the issue of CAD 999 call in the widest possible sense. But because we are meeting in public, we thought it also important to add some item which to the of the Garda Síochána and the combating corruption in the organisation. This particular recent in the forefront of all of our minds. But perhaps before we move into that formal part of the agenda, I might ask Commissioner or relevant if would or to make some in relation to receiving considerable attention. We have detailed what was in the newspapers this morning about Garda presence had an eviction that took place in Dublin, but it would be useful to get your brief.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So an incident reported at 7:15 a.m. Yesterday morning when indicated that between 20 and 30, as the description, masked men had arrived at an address at Prussia Street and had entered premises and ordered him and others to vacate the property. Anna had no pre-knowledge of an eviction. There was and is a High Court order instructing the vacation of persons found on that property. The eviction was being conducted by an agent closely associated with the owner of the property, and that was an order. So our responsibility, and we made it clear to both those who were residents in the premises in Prussia Street and to those engaged in eviction, was that we were there, one, to preserve public order, and two, to ensure no breach of criminal code, and therefore then to prevent and deal with any crime that would be reported. We took no part or in any of the eviction process that took place, but rather maintain a presence to secure the peace and prevent conflict between the two groups as it arose, or as it may have arose. There's also been some allegations and counter allegations made by both parties, and those are subject to investigation, and appropriate action has been taken in terms of securing evidence, including CCTV evidence. So the matter's ongoing in terms of our investigations, but this was not a pre-planned operation on our part. We were in effect summoned at 7:15 as this incident was unfolding.
And was this the subject of a court order? You're satisfied that that's the case?
Yes, there is a court order, and I'm in possession of the reference number. There is a court order in place. Yes.
Very good. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, can I just clarify that the investigation that you've referred to, I know obviously it's in its very early stages, will include any alleged criminal actions on the part of those who were involved in the eviction?
Well, there's been some counter allegation, and those have been recorded, and so those complaints will then be followed up by personnel from Bridewell. So yes, our purpose there said is to prevent and detect crime and preserve the peace, and that applies to both parties in this matter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions? No. Then we look forward to further information on that as it develops, and to the report when that's complete. Thank you, Commissioner. The CAD emergency calls question has been a feature of engagement between the Planning Authority and the Garda Síochána and at the last meeting, there was an update on the progress on the substantive investigation and also of the fact that some other issues had arisen. The Garda Síochána had advised the authority of the cancellation of or the routing of the perhaps unexpected routing of a range of calls. In the latter case, over 9 calls. It's there, and to what extent any of those were improper, within warrant, and perhaps since you might bring us up to bring the public up to date on where things stand with those particular issues in the first instance.
Well, thank you very much. And if we have literally a 4-slide presentation which will bring matters up to speed in terms of just the original issue and then some of the subsequent figures then as well. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. And Chair, I will address your question about the intel or incidents as well. Thank you. Presentation. Well, just to summarize, first of all, what we're talking about computer-aided dispatch incidents. Obviously, the most the biggest group of those, or the most obvious group of those, are 999 calls. But CAD incidents can originate from a number of sources. So it can also include calls to stations. So, for example, in rural settings, it's very common that callers would call to the Garda station instead of calling 999, which is more often used in urban settings. But referrals could also happen from other emergency services. So the scope of our review is looking at all computer-aided dispatch incidents, regardless of how they originated, 999 and other sources. So the first point to note, I suppose, is that all calls are answered and all incidents are logged. So again, we're focused here on the progression and the investigation of the incident after it's been initially referred to us through one of those sources. So there's both a call taker and a dispatcher. In some cases, in stations, they could be the same person, but in the case of the command and control centres, the 999 centres, they are different people. Just moving on there, just to stage kind of 7, 8, and 9, which is really the key part, I suppose, of this review, has to do with the way in which the CAD incidents, the computer-aided dispatch incidents, are closed out, or their final incident type, because that determines how things progress from the initial report and the initial handling of the incident and the dispatch of units, and how the investigation follows up. So if the incident is not correctly, if it's improperly or incorrectly closed out, then that can mean that the incident is not forwarded onto Pulse, and then there is no further record keeping, and in fact the investigation itself can be compromised. So a very, very serious matter, obviously, it's something we take very seriously. So if you could move on to the next slide, just to give some high level numbers before moving into the progress on the investigations. So during the review period, which is from the beginning of 2019 up to the end of October 2020, we received just over just under 1.5 million incidents. And again, they came from a variety of sources. Of those, just over 200,000 were cancelled or were closed off before going to that further stage of the investigation. It is worth pointing out, of course, that there are very many valid reasons why incidents would be cancelled or closed at that earlier stage and not transferred over to Pulse. We're more concerned with finding out the ones that are invalidly closed, which will be a proportion of those. So initially, our investigation is focused on 23,000 priority 0 and priority 1. Priority 0 is our top end emergency calls where there's an immediate threat to life, such as firearms. None of those are really in question. It's really the priority 1 incidents that have been the focus of the review. So if you can move on to the next slide, I'll give you an update on the investigation into the priority 1 incidents. So priority 1 incidents, we selected just under 6,000 of those incidents that related to domestic violence, sexual abuse, missing persons and health types incidents. and also any of those incidents that have been reclassified to another type, which is information. Again, that has the same effect of the incidents being cancelled or being closed off. They don't transfer to Pulse, and there's no further record keeping. The reason three types is that if they were not properly investigated, or if there wasn't a full policing service delivered at the time, there could be an ongoing risk to the caller or to the injured party. So that's the reason that they were focused on initially. So there were 5,871 of those, just under 6,000. We've determined that about half of those were correctly closed for a number of reasons. Most frequently because they were duplicates, but there's a number of other reasons as well why that might happen. So of the initial 6,000 or so, again, about half, 2,937, were suspected of being incorrectly, improperly closed. Of those, it subsequently transpired that there were 248 Pulse incidents that had actually been created at the time. So even though the records don't seem to indicate that the incident was fully investigated and dealt with at the time, and proper records were kept, so they were taken off. And then the remaining 2,689 were sent for further investigation and have been confirmed actually as not being correctly recorded at the time. So the process that we followed, in a very detailed process of examining the voice recordings of the calls, interviewing the first responders, and in many cases interviewing the victims themselves, following up with the victims to get their perspective on what happened. And in all cases for the 2,689, again, the key problem is that a Pulse incident was not created at the time, allowing for further investigation and follow-up. So those Pulse incidents now subsequently have been mostly created. We've created 2,316 of them, and just a few hundred left to go. Most of which actually are almost complete. It's just that they're not fully complete yet for data reporting purposes. So some of the key numbers, and I'll come on to the other ones in a minute, is that what we're finding is that what's being reported is that about 5%, 114 of those were crime incidents, and there are a variety of crime types. And there's a slight typo there. 95% of them were non-crime incidents. The thing about the non-crime incidents is that they also should have been recorded at the time, particularly for domestic violence type incidents, where it's important to build up a pattern of behavior for future reference. So those incidents absolutely should have been created at the time, but by creating now the Pulse incidents, that's effectively been put right. Obviously, the bigger concern would have been the investigation at the time into the 114 incidents, and one of my operational colleagues may want to comment on that afterwards, on the nature of those 114 incidents. Just at a very high level, it's worth noting that domestic violence, in particular health also issues, are very difficult to cancel legitimately or properly. Once the call is made, there is really no way for a victim or a caller to cancel it. It requires a full investigation and a full follow-up. So we'll comment some more on the 114, but quite a number of those referred to incidents where the victim had said that they didn't need a follow-up service at the time. But again, that was not a correct procedure from our perspective. That they should still have been recorded and treated as criminal incidents, regardless of whether the caller or the victim wanted the follow-up service at the time. So if you just move on then to the last slide, and just to touch on your question at the start there, Chair. So we have 373 incidents yet to be finalised out of that 2,689. So we can expect probably at the same rate that another 20 or so will be reported, which means that that final number on our detailed review of the original high priority 6,000 priority 1 incidents, it'll go up to about 130 or so. We are finalising a methodology to look at, and we will be reporting in the same way and creating Pulse incidents for any incidents that were not properly recorded at the time for the remaining 17,000 priority 1 incidents. However, as I said, it's worth noting that there will be a significantly lower rate of issues, both crime and non-crime, than what we've seen for domestic abuse and for domestic violence and for health issues. And again, that relates to the fact that it's not possible for a caller to cancel or request to cancel a domestic violence call once it's been logged, and indeed a health call as well. So that is possible for other incident types. So again, we expect a lower rate of issues to report that, but we will be reporting on those other 17,000 incidents as well. So as you touched on there, Chair, there are 2 other categories that have since come to light. So the first is that there was a new command line cancellation methods that was used on 53 occasions since the 1st of November, when these cancellations should have stopped. Of those, the conversion rate to issues is lower again than for the GDSA one. Approximately we are seeing 5 out of the 53 that were a combination of crime and non-crime incidents. And without going into them in too much detail, they were generally at the lower end of incidents. The most serious of them were public order related. And then finally, your comment about the other 19,000 incidents. So those relate to what are called intel or intelligence reports. They're actually information reports. They're not so much intelligence for high-end criminal investigations. They're generally low-level information records. Our initial focus has been on examining 1,200 of those that were reclassified to intel or from another type. And of those, we're finding that about 300 require examination. Were definitely correctly recorded as intel or 300 require more examination. We don't expect to find a very high level of issues or in fact incorrect cancellations, but we're going through a more detailed process there. And that's the 1,200 that are most likely to have been incorrectly classified to intel or. But what we are doing is developing a more automated methodology to look at the other 8,000. But from tip sampling that's been carried out so far, we expect quite a low rate of issues from the other 18,000. So the 300 really is the area of focus. And I guess just to make the point again is that the intel were created. It's not so much that they were unexpected that those intel ORs were created. What we are looking at is to make sure that they were correctly classified. There are about 300 of those, but that still requires more detailed examination. So that's about it, and hopefully that gives us some basis for the discussion. I'm sure you have some questions.
Thank you, Andrew. There is, of course, a great deal more to this than has been with including is but at every point there were to the to and to the confidence that the public has in the 999 system. And the last thing anybody wants to do is to have that confidence diminished in a slight degree because it depends. This is significant. Is a miracle, if there are such things. That something or some things dramatically more serious than this, than we have already known, emerged from this. And I think that of this issue and continue to have confidence in policing. I should have said at the very beginning that it will be recalled that the authority has commissioned Mr. Derek Penman, former head of the Police Inspectorate in Scotland, Police Inspectorate of Constitution, to investigate this issue for us. We had somewhat optimistically hoped that by the end of August there would have been a report from him for a variety of reasons. One, because of later than expected receipt of information from the Garda Síochána. Secondly, particular month, and third, because it was not possible for what were believed to be legal reasons, what are still believed to be legal reasons, for Mr. Penman to be given access to hear calls. And without hearing those calls, he will not be in a position to issue a view in relation to the quality of the service that is available to those who ring 999 and to the quality of service that was given to people who called during the period that was under review. And that work, I know further information was made available by the Garda Síochána to Mr. Penman last night, and the authorities had a very preliminary indication from him of his progress to date. That is not because it is based on sufficient information to be made public. But a range of issues will undoubtedly arise in his report, which we will be coming back to again and again. But I return to my primary point that this is, and this will continue to be a serious issue for the authority, a serious issue for the Garda. And one person, and I think with respect to the first slide, problems can arise stage 7. Problems can arise when a call is inappropriately cancelled and no dispatch, no service is offered, no person is dispatched. And as the question was raised a number of months ago, no response to does the Garda Síochána person will feel. And there was no real answer to that question. But before opening this up to other colleagues, I would like to ask one very specific question. And the reason I ask it is this. At this stage, since we first began to get serious information from the Garda Síochána, and since a number of colleagues and I attended a briefing in Harcourt Square on the 21st of May, issues of ability and discipline, important though they may be, that they were the primary focus of attention, and that the issue of the performance of individuals, quality being a less immediate. This is not wasn't a concern Síochána, but I did at first have asked the question regularly: has everybody who was involved spoken to individually? Everybody been spoken to individually about their performance, about the importance of the work they do. Not at this stage about whether if they did things that were wrong, they should be spoken to about doing things that were wrong. But whether they have been spoken to on that basis, and if so, when. And the quality of responses to that question have left me still with a sense of a lack of clarity to has. And I wonder if I could now again, everybody who has been involved in taking, dispatching, in any aspect of the issues that has of those been to, and so what level of superior or supervisory level has engaged in that process, and when did that take place?
Well, I looked to my regional colleagues just for some of the specifics of when, but in respect of the rural regions, everyone has been spoken to and has been undertaken by the inspector in charge of those regional control rooms. And DMR, somewhat different. The superintendent has undertaken this herself, and that has been a longer process, but it is a process which engages in terms of listening to calls and giving active feedback on the quality of service that's been provided. So it is quite a detailed and personal engagement to the individual in terms of their performance. And you're obviously aware of the day refresher seminars that we had as well. So I believe that 6% has been completed. The rest then of Dublin Metropolitan Region Control Room has been completed, and the region 100% complete.
And spoken to individuals.
Spoken.
And arising from conversations and arising from what you know about the extent to which some people purport cancel, has any decision been taken about continuing area or for further performance development to ensure that they're continuing they continue to be suitable for that work?
Area have taken do need to respect the individuals confidentiality of those and open, but specific that in terms of confidential correspondence, appropriate action, in my view, taken respective individuals.
I'm looking for any individual at all.
Well, but the thing is, the numbers we're talking about, and in the tight circle that they work within, become very about or inadvertent.
The course of conduct is that it is the well. First of all, I'm pleased that everybody in the three non-Dublin regional centres has been spoken to individual, and that 60% of those in the command and control centre have been spoken to individual. I believe that is work that might have been done a long time ago, and perhaps better effect to the quality of the service that's offered to the public. The question relates to, and then I'll open this up. The second question relates to the extent there is continuing monitoring of performance, monitoring calls are handled, because what are identified as 53 calls, which we understood from the Deputy Commissioner McMahon to be now perhaps 70 something calls, because there were 20 something additional calls added to that. They would have been captured at an earlier stage, as would also the extent to which this new category of intel, or which was intended issues where calls had been allocated previously in such a way that they wouldn't transfer to us, that now attracts 19,000 calls, that this issue might have been much more evident, much more quickly, and the fact that it hadn't been evident much more quickly would seem to suggest that there is inadequate supervision and monitoring of the call handling and dispatching process. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
I find difficulty in accepting that conclusion with respect, because I've had the experience of sitting for an hour with one of the sergeants as they work through their workload in terms of what comes onto their screens and the amount of actual effort in there to supervise and to manage that system. And one has to literally watch it like a hawk, because the system, neither is it intuitive and neither is it particularly logical either. It takes a lot of intervention from them around a number of different screens and different issues. And so, like what I saw, and when you're watching it for an hour, you get a good sense of the work that's engaged in this, is very active participation in the management of the calls that were happening. And that was on a busy Friday evening when there was a lot of work on, but it wasn't by any means the most busiest time. But it gave me an insight into that, and also then their interaction with the call takers in terms of the 999 calls that were being received by them as well. So there is supervision, and I know there is I think a specific issue about the analytical capability of our CAD system at the moment. We did create Intel R for a purpose. It was to record information, and information which could be shared over the net as well, and that might be in respect of a missing person or a threat, or even just information which comes to hand in terms of a patrol. So it is a category. We've stopped its use at the moment, but you can see actually in stopping its use, we actually have a function for that. But I have to say, what I do observe is that people are taking great care around this, but such is the volume, and a huge volume of calls come in, and great complexity of calls as well, that at a certain point there, we can only do what humanly is possible with the system that we have. The CAD2 will give us more in terms of its analytical capability and our ability actually to draw management information from it. But we have been engaged in the ongoing governance of this. The discovery of the Intel R issue, in part, is is part of that governance, and we will work through the process then of the examination of what was within the Intel.
Yes, Commissioner, but the fact that the CAD system is an old system and is being replaced, that is not now and never was the issue. And it's not the quality of the analysis that is at issue. It's the way in which the calls are and were dealt with. And if the quality of supervision and monitoring is as you describe, this issue would never have arisen, because that range of calls would never have been cancelled between in the months under review. And as I said earlier, it is a mercy that nothing dramatically more serious emerged in terms of cancelled calls or undelivered service. And I'm not sure that the organisation actually recognises that for itself. But I wonder whether other colleagues want to participate in this, authority colleagues. Paul.
Just on that point that that was raised by the chair, you know, that it's a mercy that things, maybe more serious things, didn't emerge. Can you give us that reassurance yet? Are you clear, Commissioner? I mean, when, for instance, Andrew did the presentation, I think he talked about 5% that were criminal matters, and gave us the figure of the number of cases that were being investigated, and a similar rate potentially, or some sort of similar rate under Intel R. Is it clear yet? Because I don't think it is to me that no one who called the 999 service was significantly adversely affected in terms of harm to them or to family members.
Can I look to Anne-Marie, because that specific question has been a constant feature of this review in terms of questions that we've been asking of the regional commissioners, and the 114 primary crime incidents that we've been dealing with, and then also then the subsequent CAD incidents that we've created are a cause of concern. You know, this, as we have acknowledged, was a service delivery failure around how we dealt with domestic abuse incidents against our own policy as well. So we were always in jeopardy when we were outside that policy, because the policy was written for a specific purpose of protecting those who were vulnerable to either domestic abuse or attendant crime. So if I can look to Anne-Marie then just about further assurances or where we are at the moment in respect of that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chair. So just at the outset, I would just like to clarify for the public really that there were no calls cancelled. Every call was answered. And the presentation made by Andrew O'Sullivan depicts at what point there was the issue arose for us. So the issue arose at step 7, which is where after the call was received, there was a car dispatched and there was some engagement with the caller or with the incident. And it's at that point that the incident may have been prematurely closed or inappropriately closed. So in the context then of the 114 incidents, all of which now have a pulse incident, associated with them, and the victim engagement piece has been completed in respect of all. So what the assurance I can provide is that that at the outset there was a service provided and there was a decision made by the dispatcher and or those responding to the call. What I can also say is that the incidents potentially, based on the incidents would not have progressed further beyond their current state or the state they were in at the time, based on the engagement with the victim at the time and subsequently. So from our perspective then, where the lacking is, or where the issue is for us, that some of these incidents related to breaches of barring orders and protection orders and so forth. So those incidents did not transfer onto Pulse, and that is where the issue arises in terms of our knowledge of the incident and our systems kicking in terms of callbacks to victims, and having that history on the Pulse system for subsequent calls should they arise. So in terms of our analysis of a call, if it were to come in subsequently, we didn't have prior to the recently created Pulse instance any record of that call. So from a service provision, that certainly would be a gap and potentially pose a risk for the victim. We've corrected that now, both in terms of our subsequent engagement with the victim, but also in terms of creating the Pulse incident. So I can assure the authority and the public that all those incidents are now have a Pulse incident created on Pulse, which will give us the history should there be a subsequent call. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, if I can just ask a follow-up to that, Chair.
Please do. I'll have one myself.
So can you give us a category? That sounds to me pretty close to, and I just want to be sure that this is what we're getting, a categoric assurance that across all of these calls, priority 1999 calls, tens of thousands of which were cancelled, that not one individual suffered adverse physical consequences as a result of whether you call it cancellation of the call or the insufficient service that was provided. Because what you seem to be suggesting, Deputy Commissioner, is that the most harm that was done was that by the absence of the creation of a Pulse incident, that then any subsequent call wouldn't have registered that there was a previous call. Is that really what the position is, that you can provide that categoric assurance that no one was adversely affected physically?
So yes, exactly. So what I'm saying is that 114 calls that that have now been transferred onto Pulse, and based on our victim engagement and our subsequent callbacks arising from this review, we are satisfied that no harm was caused by our lack of initial engagement.
Sorry, Deputy Commissioner, you're cutting out.
Your sound broke. Where's Deputy Commissioner?
I think she's dropped off.
Dropped off the call, Bob.
Oh.
Well, if I might interject, so all of the victims and who called us, and it's not completely finished yet, and so but where we've engaged with caller victim follow-up required, and that's in 1,360 cases, and we've completed 1,239. We've uncovered then 114 crimes that should have been reported and investigated and reported upon at the time, and then also then the non-crime incidents that we've covered off as well, which would have given us a greater insight into that harm in terms of physical harm. There was an absence of investigation around offences, a range of offences also, but also issues around barring orders, etc. So the difficult thing in this is there was a failure to act, and there were subsequent calls, and we were there and long relationship, but there was a failure for us to follow through on our policies in terms of ongoing examination or ongoing call back to that victim and support for that victim, and also then take very seriously that 114 offences have been were missed at the time, subsequently now recorded, But some of those would obviously be statute barred, and so we won't be able to have a criminal justice outcome in respect of those. Some of those can be investigated. So it's a very, I think it's a very nuanced picture, but I think as well the interaction and the callback with the caller victim did go well in terms of our interaction with them, and also then just subsequently where they are now in respect of all this and our ongoing engagement with them.
Stephen,
Sure.
Yeah, Commissioner, you've been quite clear that this was a service delivery failure, and you've highlighted particularly to the vulnerable, and you've used terms like failure to follow through on policies. What are you in a position, because you've talked about sitting down with a sergeant for an hour and the scale of the work and the fact that the system isn't counterintuitive. This failure, are we suggesting this is an IT and process failure? Are we saying it's a performance or a supervision failure? Or is it something of a cultural and behavioral failure? Is it any one of those in a discrete way? Is it a mixture of the three of them? What exactly happened? I know we're carrying out reviews, and you can give me an easy answer to say, well, let's see how the review determines. But what is your sense and the essence of what went on here?
Well, in part, when you look at the incident 5,871 incidents, and then that goes down to a very close examination of 3,180. Every one of them has some different characteristics and are very nuanced. If we set the technology to the side, because I think that the point I'm making there is just about the difficulty of supervising it and drawing analytical data from it. But then if we move on then just to the application of our own policies around protection of individuals who report domestic abuse type incidents, then that's where the failure is on occasion, and that number is in the order of 2,689 within this group. We didn't follow through properly on our policy, which is about, in effect, going the extra mile, going to the call anyway, whether the caller has called back and said not to go, carrying out additional inquiries where we can't find perhaps an address, or the address has been recorded incorrectly, carrying on with some form of investigation to make sure that we are certain around the details that we were given. So there are certainly human failings in this, in terms of just how these matters were closed off and finally assessed. I suppose the comfort we can take is from where we've continued on and done the follow-up. That follow-up has been by and large very positive in terms of our engagement with individuals. So,
Commissioner, I'm sorry to interrupt you on this one,
yeah.
But just in going back to what Deputy Commissioner McMahon said, that looking at taking Andrew O'Sullivan's timeline or life cycle of a call, that no issue arose in relation to responding to calls or dispatching units. Every call was answered. We know every call, every time everybody rings 999, they get an answer. The question is whether there was action following the answer. And Deputy Commissioner McMahon seems to be saying that that there was no case in which a service was provided because a unit was dispatched. In every case, this is not what the Garda Síochána said. In all of the times, this is not what was said to me when I was in the Command and Control Centre in Galway for the Northwestern region. I listened to calls, you listened to calls, Commissioner, more of them than I did. Other colleagues listened to calls, and they did not represent the provision of a service that would allow one to say that there were no issues, that every call was answered, service provided to everybody. and except in this tiny number of incidents, well, 114 isn't a tiny number, that there may have been issues of no follow through. I'm perplexed in the extreme at this stage in terms of the apparently shifting position.
If I might say, where we've received a call, they were placed on the CAD system, and on the CAD incident life cycle, then that takes us to either 5 or 6 on that diagram. Is that what you were trying to convey, Anne-Marie? That just like every call, there's specific comment about what if no one answers, but we have no feedback that's actually been the scenario, that nobody or that no one has been in the position where they've rung 999 and not got an answer in terms of the phone being lifted.
Yes, Commissioner.
Suggested at any stage in this that people ring 999 and the call isn't answered. People, we were told by the Garda Síochána, people ring 999 to a story is told or a history is taken, and then nothing happens. No unit is dispatched, no service was provided, and nothing there is recorded because the call is the call is information available to either information is taken inaccurately and Gardaí are dispatched to an address where they have no information about it, or they're dispatched to a wrong address, and we have seen and we have heard of that. And there can't be a proper service in those circumstances. And I difficult to understand how that kind of a categorical statement can be made at the stage of the game. And part of me wonders whether there is any point in continuing a conversation until such time as we get Mr. Penman's review. But other colleagues want to explain. Shalom.
I just have one question. Commissioner, you made reference to the percentages of people in various districts who have been spoken to about what occurred. Have they been asked why they cancelled the calls? There's 200,000 incidents cancelled or prematurely closed, whatever language we want to use. That's 14% of 1.5 million incidents in that period. Like, why were they cancelled? That's Stephen, my colleague, tried to touch on it by referring to cultural issues, technological issues, or supervision issues. But after speaking to all of those individuals, have they been asked why they cancelled those calls?
Well, cancellation was a means of disposal of a CAD incident, and it doesn't equate with the premature closure. Calls can be cancelled, and that's entirely appropriate. What we've changed is that now only a supervisor, either sergeant or inspector, can close a call. But if either look to either Anne-Marie or Barry, just to give some of the feedback that they may have heard from the specific individuals who are engaged in the control rooms, please.
Perhaps maybe I'll come in and just in respect of cancellation, there are a number of very valid reasons why calls. Just maybe I think we should probably go through it just so we're very clear. The first one is that it's duplicates. The vast majority of calls, so when we're talking about 200,000 calls, the vast majority of those were correctly cancelled because they are duplicate incidents. The second area is that it is an area where it's the primary responsibility of another response agency, be that the fire service, the health service.
Assistant Commissioner O'Brien, I really am reluctant to interrupt anybody ever, but right. we have been through all of these issues at previous discussions. We know the reasons, we know the valid reasons why calls are cancelled. the whole purpose of this engagement was to look at those where in the language of the Garda Síochána, they were unwarranted cancellations of calls. And cancellation is a Garda Síochána word, not a policing authority word. And now to say that no call was cancelled, it seems to me to be a very novel development, if nothing else. Shalom. And then I'm going to move on.
If you let me finish, Chair, perhaps just if I could just go through the last two, because
no, I'm sorry, Assistant Commissioner, we've had this conversation. We've been through this particular issue time and time again, and it is not material to the area the problem arises. We know the valid reasons why calls are cancelled. The focus of all of our attention all the time has been in those areas where calls were cancelled in, to use your own words, Garda Síochána, unwarranted cancellations. That's the issue. That's the
Chair, if I could have the opportunity just to refer, because Steve Martin asked a question in respect of why the 2,000 calls were cancelled and what sense we had. So perhaps if I get the opportunity to give you what sense we have from the review that we've undertaken to date. The areas where the cancellations have been a cause of concern, and hence our fairly detailed inquiry into it, are areas where individuals, particularly when we receive a call, that they get a subsequent call to say everything's all right and they don't want to guard a service.
Yeah.
Now, in the norm, that's governed by very strict procedures. So, for example, in most cases, we take it on face value. But in two critical areas, which are the areas of domestic violence, sexual assault, and alarms, our policy is that there are certain safeguards in respect of alarms, but in respect of domestic violence, sexual assault, we do not cancel calls until a unit has been dispatched. And in these cases, there are the cases where the units were either dispatched and were then subsequently withdrawn as a consequence of the caller coming back and saying that they didn't require a service, and the risks around that. And that's why we have focused in on this particular area and ascertained whether there was any additional difficulty. So that is our sense of what happened.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Shalom. And then we're going to move on.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask maybe this question should go to how can we have any confidence now that there aren't going to be similar workarounds, people trying to avoid, having to obey the new rules on cancelling calls? Because some time ago, when you spoke to this authority, you said that fixes had been put in place and that management had put new supervisory measures in place so that calls could not be cancelled in the way that originally came to light. And now at this stage, we're finding that your members and people working in this area are finding new ways to cancel calls. And at every turn, this seems to be what we're experiencing. So there seems to be a very serious cultural problem. And we haven't heard anything yet that would give us any assurance that that cultural problem is being tackled, in my respectful submission. So I would just ask the question how the public and how we as the authority could have any confidence in the system as it stands at this moment.
Well, I would point to the intervention there's been, and I've talked about that in terms of the training that's been done, the intervention there's been then in terms of speaking individually to individuals, and the additional supervisory processes that have been put in place. And then the very keen interest that's been taken in this by all the regional ACs and the deputies and myself in terms of the supervision and what's going on. And also then, the focus there's been on this, there's been a huge focus that we've put in place in respect of this, and also then the actions that we've also had to take in respect of discipline issues, as well as the training, the individual conversations, but also then discipline investigations as well. But I would say that 999 calls are answered. Calls to the stations are answered, CAD incidents are created, and we have a process in place to make sure that CAD incidents are dealt with properly. I know supervisors are actively engaged in this, and I know it's very much a performance and supervision issue for all the regional ACs. It's reinforced all the time with the divisional officers and the superintendents, inspectors responsible for this. We've made sure that there's effective supervision there, and also then where people have used a workaround and there's 53 incidents identified, that those have been properly identified, dealt with, and service provision also rectified. In respect of the Intel R, we did create that. We did create that for a purpose, and we're going through the examination of what's actually in that category. But a lot of what's in that category is appropriate as well. So we do offer a good service in terms of response to emergency calls, and this is part of just making sure that that service meets the public's expectations.
Commissioner, were the 53 or the 50 or the 77 or whatever number of calls it was that were which of a what's the word I'm looking for, a route in the system, was that observed as a consequence of supervisory monitoring?
That was brought to the attention of a supervisor by one of the members of the control room staff that in effect this other route towards cancellation existed, and then as a result of that, within the system, other means of cancellation were also identified, and those were closed off. Should they've been used or not, but other fixes were in effect put in place, and from those N5 pulse, either crime or non-crime incidents were instigated, created.
So what was declared to be hadn't been fixed, and when there was a way around it found, it wasn't identified as a result of the ongoing monitoring or supervision. It was somebody who brought it to the attention of a supervisor, which is an interesting consideration, Paul, and then we're going to move from this.
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick clarification. Coming back to this issue about the extent to which you can give us reassurance about people who may have been harmed. Can I just be absolutely clear? In Andrew's presentation, where he talks about, I know we're getting into semantic differences here, but he talks about incidents being cancelled. So maybe if we agree to use that terminology, he talks about 23,361 priority 0 and priority 1 incidents being cancelled. Then the cases that have been under review are a subset of that, if I'm clear. Is that right? 5,871 DVSA, health, etc. So
yes,
in other words,
yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So that means there are also some 17,000 priority 0 and priority 1 cancelled incidents that have not been subject to any review yet.
Work has commenced in respect of those, but we're not. I don't believe we're in a position to report on that.
I can comment on it at a high level. Your numbers are correct there, Paul. But work has been undertaken, and as I commented on there, we're not in a position to report yet. Finally, that the rate of issues, the rate of incorrect cancellations, which means that a crime or non-crime pulse incident should have been created, will be significantly lower than what we've observed with the 6,000. And again, the reason for that is that the DVSAs and the health are much more difficult to cancel legitimately. They require and regardless of whether the caller or the injured party asks us to not to attend, that still has to happen, and that's not the case with the other incidents. So the other 17,000 have been examined, and we will be reporting on that. And we can say that, you know, I can't give you the exact figures, but the rate of issues will be significantly lower. We focused first where we thought the biggest issue was going to occur, and everything we found since then has borne that out. So those 17,000, there's no suggestion that they were incorrectly cancelled. We probably will find some things in there, but it won't be at the same rate as we found with the DVSA and the health ones, which is the 6,000. So we expect to see an awful lot less than the 5% crimes that we saw out of the ones that were incorrectly cancelled in that's the 2689. Sorry, I don't mean to throw all those kind of numbers at you, but the 17,000 have been examined and we will be reporting on those.
Thank you.
But let us always remember, before we leave this, that the priority 2 and priority 3 incidents were also occasions when people rang 999, which is a measure of the seriousness they attach to it. And yes, we hope that we won't find anything of comparable level of but I leave the situation with a great deal less reassurance than I had hoped to when we started it. And I have, no, I won't say what I was going to say, but I am not reassured, and I'm not reassured that is addressing some of the issues, addressing in its conversation with itself some of the issues that are involved here. I'm not remotely reassured about that after today. I want to move on to the other issue that we had, we wanted to introduce. And we have less time, but this will not be the last time, because it's not the first time we have talked about some of these issues. The last number of months have seen and have allowed the public to see a disturbing number of issues that involve inappropriate behaviour or alleged criminal behaviour on members of the Garda Síochána. It raises questions, again, of confidence, but it raises questions of culture and of moral probity and of the kind of organisation in which these things can happen. Services all over the world encounter some of the difficulties that we're talking about. But where people, serving members, have been suspended for, in circumstances where the DPP has preferred charges, where about the of in domestic abuse within their own families, where attitudes are revealed in actions taken by members. It raises issues. I think that it's important that the public hear your commissioner, and it was really important that at an inquest recently, and I don't want to mention the names of any stress, where apology from the public was recorded. It was an important development, and that is important. I'm not saying it's, but it is important because it conveys a significant message. As was the apology that you extended to people who hadn't been properly responded to in the context of the 999 calls. That was also important. It wasn't universally approved of by all of your colleagues, but it was important. And there are a few questions that I would like to ask, and briefly. The first is when you indicated last week, I think that particularly in the light of the extended coverage of a case in Great Britain, the organisation was reviewing cases which Gardaí were accused of domestic abuse or sexual assault. Are you satisfied that sufficiently independent in the absence of an independent involvement in it? Are you satisfied that the organisation will be sufficiently detached from any risk of self-review and therefore limited review? I don't mean to diminish the seriousness of anybody who's involved with it, but I think more in terms of the confidence of the public.
Well, mind that initially we'll be seeking to review live investigations, and those live investigations would always be reported to the Director of Public Prosecution. So what we have to do is in effect satisfy the Director of Public Prosecutions as well in terms of the effectiveness of our investigations. But I think following the murder of Sarah Everard is a proportionate and appropriate step for me to signal how seriously we take violence against women in the first place, but secondly then violence which happens in a domestic setting, particularly where it involves then members of Garda Síochána. And because for us then there's the second issue about public confidence in terms of people reporting domestic abuse to the organisation, and also then the response that they would receive. So there's the first part of that work, and then I think then beyond that, then we will want to look back at what is, and I know we've supplied you recent information of suspensions. We want to review those cases that have not come to fruition or not followed through on a discipline case, just to review. We have learned from that, but also then to consider that in terms of our developing in-house vetting processes that we wish to introduce for our own Garda members and Garda staff. So there's quite a bit of in this. We're observing what is happening in London in particular, the Metropolitan Police, and they are issuing regular updates, and in some ways what they're learning and will also inform us on where it's most fruitful for us to spend our resources and our time, and where the learning might be. And so just really started, but the initial piece is, are we content with the investigations that are ongoing? And I don't say that because I have a concern, an over concern, but it's just that we are sure ourselves that I can in effect put my hand on the investigation, say I'm content that they're progressing and that the investigation is.
It doesn't need any.
Well, they're live crime investigations.
Sure.
And if there's a failure if there's not sufficient evidence, then we need to look to the next process in terms of what we would do in terms of either peer support or a case review. So we are talking about the live investigations. I do take your point about maybe perhaps some of the older cases, but I do think that would be in terms of policy, the system in terms of policy formulation and how we advance this going forward. Because there's an imperative upon me, there's an imperative upon Garda Síochána to be clear that where we have individuals that we know who is dealing with those who are very vulnerable, maybe vulnerable through domestic abuse or sexual assault, and we're entirely with that.
Thank you. The Ethics and Culture Bureau or the Human Rights Unit are involved in some of these discussions. Perhaps they are, but do you think there is a value so that there can be an interweaving of this lived experience with the and so those people who are providing training in relation to the Code of Ethics could find real live test cases as opposed to hypothetical test cases to consider ethical dilemmas that face.
Turn to started on the basis of a discussion between myself and the senior team, but a very important part of this is obviously the lessons learned. So if I turn to Sean just about the work that's ongoing at the moment, please.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, there is involvement in the Ethics Bureau. In fact, we look at things across a suite of programs in terms of how they're dealt with. And when you look at, for example, the integrity building training that's been done by the anti-corruption unit, they're all based on real scenarios. So not only are they based on real scenarios, but the scenarios are chosen based on a strategic analysis that's been done in terms of what kinds of scenarios are of the most risk to the organization. And so that's driving not only what the training looks like, but the kinds of policies and procedures, which ones we're putting out and in what order, which we're doing at this time. And so even when you look at, for example, the cultural audit, which the research phase of that has begun already in terms of looking at current cases as they're envisioned by the media. And so some of the discussions we're having today would be the kinds of things that are being considered in what should be asked and what should be looked at going forward. So it is an integrated approach. And I know sometimes as we have these discussions and they're shorter in terms of looking at it, please understand that it is being looked at holistically and as a program right across the organization, and the Ethics Bureau is definitely involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Final question for me, Commissioner, and on this topic, and it relates to something I said earlier. What is the response within the organization? And to use a phrase I used earlier, what is the conversation the organization is having with itself about these issues? Do you think that there is a universal awareness of the significance, of the seriousness, of the confidence issue that arises in, I don't want to use the word cascade as if they were happening every second, but in this series of cases or allegations or charges that have arisen and that raise such fundamental questions about the behaviour of Garda members?
Well, I'd point to a couple of things. One is our own cultural audit from 2018, where people actually, highlighted that in effect wrongdoing was being turned a blind eye to, and that's very corrosive to the morale of those who come into work to do an ethical and honest and full day's work and be paid for that. So when thinking about this, I often think about the great majority of the members in Garda Síochána who do that, who come in and are honest and ethical and do a good piece of work. I think amongst those who we are having to deal with and the investigations that are ongoing, no one can take pleasure in that, and I as Commissioner can't take pleasure in that. And as I said to you earlier, it is a sense of dismay that you see these investigations opening up. But these investigations and in effect then, being followed through to their ultimate conclusion is an essential part of us promoting not only just public confidence in Garda Síochána, but the full sense of public safety in Garda Síochána in terms of our contribution and the sense of trust that that society has in us and coming forward, sometimes with the most sensitive and difficult of issues, to understand that they're going to be professionally and properly dealt with. And that's absolutely essential in our mission of keeping the people of Ireland safe. So while one takes no pleasure in it, it is absolutely essential work. And if I hadn't started, the next Commissioner would have had to do it. So we make a start, we set what the standards are, we make it clear what behaviour is beyond the pale. The Code of Ethics assists in that, the new Code of Conduct will assist in that, but also then the decisions as they come along in respect of individual cases will also make that very clear. And we've done a huge internal piece of communication around the new anti-corruption unit. The Code of Ethics sets out, in effect, I think in a positive way, what the positive behaviours are we want from the organisation as we develop the policies of the Garda Anti-Corruption Unit. That's setting out specific areas of threat and risk to us. And part of the anti-corruption unit's work is also to protect members from the influences or the attempts by, say, organised crime groups to corrupt them as well. We have a helpline that people can report incidents, and we've set out then what the various threats are and the threats of, in effect, trying to corrupt individuals and infiltration. So we face particular risks around corruption, and it's correct for us to identify them, and then it is entirely correct for us then, where we do identify them, do identify specific incidents, that they're investigated properly and absolutely essential to our function.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can I ask any other colleagues? Stephen.
Yes, Commissioner, can I, you've mentioned the anti-corruption unit, and can I welcome your investment? I think it's in that unit, I think it's essential. And I think whilst it may lead to the uncovering of corruption or attempted corruption, that may lead to difficult headlines in the media for you, it is a very healthy and appropriate thing that the Garda Síochána are doing. Obviously, when a member of the public is suspected of serious wrongdoing and criminality, the full weight of Garda Síochána investigative techniques and capability are applied to them. I don't want or expect or require you to give any significant detail here at all for obvious reasons, but just on behalf of the public who are watching this, would you be in a position to just absolutely reassure us that your anti-corruption unit has full investigative capacity available to it within the organisation, and where suspected corrupt criminality is taking place, that the full range of both covert and overt tools are available to that unit when investigating potential wrongdoing?
Well, I can give that absolute assurance. I can give further assurances around our, at a senior level, and then at the investigative level, our determination in respect of these investigations, and also our support to the Ombudsman, where they request our specialist assistance as well. And these are, in effect, well-trodden paths and have been used and used successfully. So we do regard these matters as being incredibly serious, and thorough and fulsome investigations are engaged upon them.
Thank you.
Any other? Paul, thank you.
Just in relation to that last point, Commissioner, you mentioned there the risk that that Garda Síochána face from organised crime and infiltration by organised criminals. And there have been some media reports in recent weeks that the anti-corruption unit and that the Garda are trying to assess the scale of that infiltration. Is there anything you can say about that? What, in your view, is the current scale of infiltration by organised crime?
It would be very difficult at this juncture to say what the scale is. We have to look to international comparators, and we are a large force, almost 14,500. And also then we do have active organised crime groups who are ruthless and murderous actually in their actions as well. So there's nothing beyond them. And what I have to do is make sure that I'm aware of that risk, and also then try and protect members from either blackmail or coercion that organised crime groups might want to exercise upon them. But also then we have to, one of the things that will flow from the anti-corruption unit is in-service vetting, and so that we keep close eye in terms of what those risks might be. We do need some legislation in effect to back this up in terms of just some of the vetting processes that we wish to undertake. But at least we're identifying the problem. It's been seen elsewhere. We'd be naive to think then we don't have a problem. And I have to then also point then to our drug abuse policies, their implementation, and just the prevalence there is of drugs in our society, and therefore then the obvious use of drugs there must be then among Garda members. And that's an obvious point then where individuals can be subject to coercion or blackmail by a crime group. So a lot of this is actually, you know, it's protecting the individual members as well and helping them to ensure that they are protected from those who wish them harm in terms of corrupting their career.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Have you any concern, Commissioner, and you may not want to answer this question, have you any concern about elected representatives making observations or comments in the Dáil or otherwise about issues that are being undertaken, or about investigations that are being undertaken by the Garda Síochána in respect of its own members?
Well, if I say, I believe the passage of time will bear out what we're doing there. And the passage of time will see that it's absolutely correct that we work hard to identify where we believe there's corrupt behaviour and then properly investigate that, and if necessary report to the Director of Public Prosecutions. And you know that is one of our functions, and it's intrinsic to my role and the role of the senior leaders in the organisation to make sure that we work in a healthy, honest and ethical organisation, absolutely intrinsic to our leadership and management role. So I'm subject to a lot of commentary in respect of that. I don't want to specify any of the particular commentators, but I'm confident that what we are doing will be seen to be borne out in the medium to long term. And in the long term, what we want to be sure of is an organisation which is positive in its outlook, well managed, where people can speak up and where issues are dealt with quickly. And one of the things I should point out to individuals in the organisation, because I know a lot of people in the organisation will listen to what I'm saying, is a lot of rogue individuals, rogue members in the organisation, they are in plain sight. And if you have concerns, then you should bring them to the anti-corruption unit or to a supervisor. But they are in plain sight, and nobody's particularly surprised when an investigation is opened up into many of these individuals. And I want people to remember that it's not that those who are letting us down come from nowhere. They're in amongst us, and probably those who are honest and ethical give them a wide berth, but better tell us than say nothing.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for that, for those comments. Elaine.
Commissioner, how do you define corruption? And do you think that definition is one that is understood throughout the ranks within the Gardaí?
Well, we have a definition of corruption that we've adopted, and it's one that we've adopted from really examination of international practice, and it sits within our policy documents. I think corruption comes in many forms, and the understanding of what corruption is in the organisation is growing. I would say perhaps when I started, people viewed corruption as, you know, connected to serious criminality, whereas corruption can come in many forms, and we have dealt with serious issues of misconduct that haven't been crime, which fall properly into corrupt behaviour, because individuals have in effect used the power they hold and the position that they hold for unfair or really inappropriate advantage. And some of that's been in pursuing sexual relationships, or some of it has been pursuing favourable treatment in other areas of life. So it's a good question, in that corruption for our part also then includes not just criminality but serious misconduct. And I think what I want to highlight in respect of that is we have an obligation to protect the public from risk in the first place, and we also have an obligation to secure and maintain confidence in the organisation. And behaviour which the public knows is wrong is really insidious in terms of undermining that.
Commissioner, you said that there's a growing understanding within the force of the definition of corruption. So that suggests that perhaps there's more understanding to occur. And I mean, the anti-corruption unit that's been established is the first in the force's history. This is new to the force, and it's commendable that you've introduced it. And but how do you think that understanding among all ranks of the force can be of corruption can be encouraged and understood?
Well, if I may turn to Pat, because Pat can underline or set out the communication, internal communication program we've undertaken.
Oh, thanks very much. So Elaine, you'll be aware, and the authority have taken part in some of the training that we had in person for, we started with training for senior leaders, and we started that in June, and we have about 80% of our senior leaders from superintendent, assistant principal level upwards have been trained in person. And that training involved partners, Deloitte, and also international policing subject matter experts, and also the Garda College, and indeed the Anti-Corruption Unit. And that has involved scenario type cases that we talked about, real life cases where people need to make ethical decisions. That has been very well received by those who have partaken. In addition, we intend cascading that down to all our people through the use of LMS training and other media. We have been engaged in both external communications to tell the public about it. We had a public launch of the Anti-Corruption Unit on the 1st of June, and we took questions from the media. We've also been engaged in a communication strategy within the organization. So I think that it is right that there is a greater understanding emerging of corruption. So corruption for us primarily involves the abuse of power for undue advantage. And that just undue advantage isn't confined to monetary gain, but it can be involved in lots of other areas. So I suppose there would have been a cynicism among lots of our people that, we think that corruption doesn't exist in these parts, that's something that happens in darkest Africa. But I think we all understand collectively. And, this morning we were briefing Greco in terms of their 5th round evaluation, which is currently taking place in relation to central government and law enforcement. And we've been talking to our colleagues on the evaluation team, and we've been giving it to them warts and all. We've been telling them, areas where we have seen developments, where we have done rollouts of new systems, and we've also highlighted, that we're working together with the Department of Justice in terms of implementing the Inspectorate's report on counter-corruption, which of course we welcome, that it endorses the Commissioner's idea in this regard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner Cleven. Is anybody else wishing to? I think not, and we are probably out of our time. Commissioner, thank you, and to your colleagues for, first of all, facilitating this unscheduled public session. It's important, and in particular for the elaboration of the issues in relation to not just the Anti-Corruption Unit, but the entire issue of integrity and behaviour within the organisation, because it is so central to, as we've said, to public confidence, to trust, to morale within the organisation, to vindicate those who are honourable individuals and who strive to do their very best in the profession that they have chosen and in the public interest. And they are among those who are most severely affected if misbehaviour goes unresponded to and is allowed to develop, and because it is a corrosive and festering sore. Thank you for that. We will. Our next meeting is in November. That will also has a public dimension to it, and I hope that by then we will have something that we can share and publish, more to the point, from Derek Penman on the 999 calls issue, and where some of the issues that flow from that and the way in which they need to be dealt with can be part of our conversation. And thank you to colleagues and to all of you for the indulgence in exceeding our scheduled time. Thank you, and thank you that
Thanks
the
very
meeting
much.
is now concluded.